The ballroom at Lockridge Manor was ablaze with golden light, reflecting off the crystal chandeliers and polished brass sconces like stars caught in a jar. Laughter rippled through the crowd as champagne flutes clinked and violins played softly in the background. The annual Hargrave family winter soiree had begun, a grand, gaudy affair that marked the end of the fiscal year and the unofficial competition of who had done the most, bought the most, and earned the most praise. At the edge of the room, in a modest midnight blue dress with clean lines and no designer label, Elara stood quietly, sipping sparkling water. She didn't blend in, not quite. Not because she was loud or dramatic, on the contrary, her presence was often so quiet it made people uncomfortable. She simply didn't sparkle the way her relatives did. She hadn't come for the show. "Elara. There you are." A voice sang out behind her, sharp with polished charm. Delia Hargrave, her cousin, was approaching in a beaded scarlet gown that shimmered like fire. Her tone was equal parts sugar and superiority. "We were just talking about everyone's milestones," Delia beamed, slipping an arm through Elara's like a well-rehearsed performance. "Charles just opened his 6th clinic in Dubai. Mila sold her 5th AI patent. And of course, I'm finalizing the Hargrave Technologies and Polaris merge this quarter." Elara smiled, polite but unreadable. "Congratulations. I heard it's been complex." Delia paused just for a second, the slightest hitch in her expression. "Nothing we can't manage. You know how these things are. But I suppose that's not really your world anymore, is it?" Before Elara could answer, their Aunt Lenore, Patriarch Julian Hargrave's sister, swooped in, her voice dripping with backhanded pleasantries. "Elara, darling. Are you still doing, what do you call it? Freelance strategy work?" She said it like someone describing a child selling lemonade from a wobbly card table. "Still consulting," Elara replied smoothly. "Keeping it lean. Of course." Lenore nodded with exaggerated grace. "Some people thrive with simplicity." Elara sipped her drink and thought of the portfolio on her encrypted tablet back in her car. The final revisions to a $2.4 billion acquisition deal were there, alongside emails from Polaris's executive board, emails Delia hadn't seen. Emails that had been routed through Elara's firm under a name no one at this party had ever heard. Not because it was small, but because it was designed that way. 10 years ago, Elara had left her high-paying job at Calder and Mason, the prestigious strategy house known for advising royal families and Fortune 50s alike. People said she'd thrown away a golden career. In truth, she'd simply stopped playing someone else's game. She launched an anonymous consulting network called Northgate Atlas, a name pulled from her grandfather's old sea maps. The company had no public face, no flashy logos. It operated through trusts and holding companies, using elite legal shields and silent partnerships. Northgate didn't chase press. It chased leverage. In the past decade, Elara had guided million-dollar decisions from the shadows, structuring mergers, protecting generational wealth, dismantling monopolies, and building new ones. Polaris, the conglomerate currently negotiating to absorb Hargrave Technologies, was one of Northgate's most strategic ghost clients. Delia thought she was negotiating a breakthrough deal. In reality, she was walking right into a consolidation trap that Elara had been orchestrating for years. "Elara, dear," Delia said suddenly, turning toward a circle of relatives, "you should join us. We're all sharing our big win from this year. You must have something to celebrate." Elara smiled faintly. "Just steady progress." "Oh," Delia said, tilting her head sympathetically. "Sometimes just staying afloat is the win, isn't it?" At that moment, their cousin Vincent stepped in. A newly minted senior associate at one of the country's most cutthroat law firms, he held his bourbon glass like a business card. "If you're ever tired of the grind," Vincent offered, "we've got openings. I could put in a word for you. Admin support or onboarding, perfect for someone with your adaptability." Elara blinked slowly. "That's very thoughtful of you." She didn't mention that just last week, Vincent's firm had submitted a pitch deck for a Polaris expansion contract, sent to an address tied to one of Northgate's blind inboxes. They had no idea the CEO on the call had been Elara herself, her voice disguised beneath filters and her identity hidden by virtual proxies. The gall of it all almost made her laugh. Their uncle Julian, CEO of Hargrave Technologies and the evening's unspoken emperor, eventually made his appearance, flanked by board members and legacy donors. He gave his usual speech about excellence, tradition, and the burden of brilliance. Applause followed, but Elara hardly heard it. Her mind was already on tomorrow morning's meeting, one that would quietly decide the future of the Hargrave family's crown jewel. She didn't need to speak into a microphone. She had a signature waiting to be inked. As the music shifted into a slow waltz, Dahlia leaned in. "Oh, before I forget. I have a meeting tomorrow morning. Polaris's advisory team wants a final walkthrough. Just formalities. You know, those things you used to sit in on?" Elara looked at her for a long moment. "You should come by sometime," Dahlia added. "See how real decisions are made." Elara set her empty glass on a tray. "Actually, I have a meeting of my own." "Really? Another client?" Elara met her cousin's eyes. "Something like that," she said, her voice as cool as the marble beneath their heels. "Tomorrow's going to change a lot." Dahlia smiled, patronizing. "Well, good luck with that." As Elara turned to leave, she heard her cousin's voice behind her, soft, but sharp. "Such a shame. All that potential wasted." Outside, in the silence of her Tesla, Elara finally checked the message that had been buzzing her pocket all evening. From Alex, COO, Polaris Holdings. Subject, Hargrave Agreement. Final vote came through. Hargrave board is desperate. They'll sign anything. Tomorrow, we seal it. You hold every card. Elara smiled, her reflection barely visible in the dark windshield. Tomorrow, she would walk into the 72nd floor boardroom of Polaris Holdings, not as the failed Hargrave cousin, but as the woman who orchestrated one of the most elegant corporate coups in recent history. The name on the final contract would read: E. Marin Grayson, Principal, Northgate Atlas. And with that signature, she wouldn't just rewrite the future of Hargrave Technologies. She would rewrite her family's story. The next morning, the sky over Manhattan was steel gray, the kind of morning that felt quiet but charged, like the city itself was holding its breath. Elara stepped into the private elevator of Polaris Holdings headquarters, her heels clicking softly against the brushed marble floors. Her suit was custom tailored, a deep graphite gray, sharp and graceful. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakably expensive. A soft charcoal silk blouse peeked out beneath the lapel, paired with a delicate, modern lapis brooch pin just below her collarbone. She looked every bit the powerful strategist she had become. But no one in her family had ever seen this version of her. "Good morning, Ms. Grayson," said Serena, her executive assistant, greeting her at the 72nd floor lobby. "Conference room ready?" Elara asked. "Polaris board is in place. Hargrave delegation is waiting in the South Wing lounge. They've been growing restless." Elara smiled slightly. "Let them stew." "And the legal team?" she asked. "Standing by," Serena replied, then lowered her voice slightly. "Dahlia's been vocal. She's demanded to speak directly to Polaris's lead advisor, doesn't realize you're already in the building." Elara didn't respond. She simply adjusted the slim platinum watch on her wrist and walked through the polished corridor toward the main boardroom. Across the building, the Hargrave delegation occupied a sleek glass lounge meant for high-value guests. Dahlia paced the room in her dove gray pencil skirt and sharp blazer, furiously tapping her manicured nails against her phone. "It's completely unprofessional," she snapped. "We're supposed to finalize one of the biggest tech mergers in this firm's history, and their advisory team is 20 minutes late." Vincent, ever present with a legal pad and a half smirk, looked up from his spot on the couch. "Maybe they're rethinking the terms." "I don't care if they're debating the moon," Dahlia barked. "You don't make people like us wait." Julian Hargrave, CEO and patriarch, sat in silence, watching his daughter with narrowed eyes. He had grown used to power, used to people bending to the family name. The delay unsettled him, not because it felt disrespectful, but because it was unexpected. And unexpected meant dangerous. When the message finally came through, it was Serena who appeared with practiced calm. "The lead advisor from Polaris is ready to meet with you now," she said. "This way, please." They followed her across the executive floor, through a corridor of abstract glass art and polished stone, until they reached the main boardroom. The door was closed. Just before Serena pushed it open, Dahlia whispered under her breath, "About damn time." The door swung open. And there, at the head of the table, stood Elara. For a full 10 seconds, no one moved. Elara's presence hit the room like an earthquake without sound, pure, measured disruption. Dahlia's mouth fell open, her practiced composure shattering in real time. "Elara?" Julian said, blinking. "What the hell is this?" Elara stepped forward with quiet confidence, placing a sleek leather folder on the table. The Polaris logo gleamed on the screen behind her. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm and commanding. "Thank you all for coming. I know you've been eager to finalize the terms of the Polaris-Hargrave merger." Dahlia stepped forward, confused and furious. What are you doing here? This is a private corporate session." "Yes, it is," Elara agreed. "Which is why I'm here. As the principal advisor and chief negotiator from Northgate Atlas." Vincent dropped his pen. Julian stared. "That's not possible. Northgate is a boutique firm," Elara finished for him. "Anonymous, discreet, and very good at what it does." She clicked a button on the table console. Instantly, the room's screens came alive, displaying a full merger roadmap, layered legal diagrams, and a confidential ownership chart. At the center was the Northgate Atlas emblem. And right beneath it, Principal Advisor, E. Marin Grayson. "Northgate," she continued, "has been working with Polaris for over 6 years. We've overseen 18 strategic mergers and negotiated over $15 billion in acquisitions. This particular initiative, the integration of Hargrave Technologies, has been in motion for almost 4." Julian's voice was a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You've been behind this the whole time? Correct? And you're the one calling the shots?" "I prefer the term coordinating outcomes," she said with a cool smile. Dahlia was visibly unraveling. "This is absurd. You've been in the background for a decade. You're not qualified to." "I built the structure your company is now desperate to lean on," Elara interrupted. "And you, Dahlia, walked right into the design." What followed was a masterclass in silence breaking. Elara laid out the merger documents, each page crisp, annotated, and time-stamped. Every clause had been carefully constructed to grant Polaris long-term influence in Hargrave's innovation divisions. The consulting fees? Redirected into equity holdings. The leadership transition plan? Already signed by 3 of Hargrave's board members the night before. Dahlia and Julian watched as Elara clicked to the final slide, a pie chart showing Polaris's controlling share in the new entity. "And with the final vote from Polaris's executive team this morning," she said, tapping her tablet, "Northgate Atlas will assume operational authority for the transition phase. Which, by the terms your legal team agreed to, places executive oversight in our hands." "You can't," Dahlia choked out. "I'm leading this deal." "You were," Elara corrected. "But Polaris is not interested in symbolic leadership. They want results." "Is this about revenge?" Julian asked, eyes cold. "You're doing this to humiliate us?" Elara walked around the table slowly, looking each of them in the eye. "This is about vision. For years, I watched as you dismissed me. Called me unstable, unrealistic. You scoffed at what you didn't understand. But while you were playing legacy, I was building strategy." She stopped next to Dahlia. "Last night, you told me to come see what real business looks like," she said. "And now, you're sitting in it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Vincent muttered, "What happens now?" Elara straightened her jacket. "We implement the transition plan. Effective immediately, Hargrave's executive team will be reassigned. Dahlia, your position will be dissolved under the new leadership structure. Vincent, your firm's advisory contract has already been cancelled." Julian remained seated, motionless. His voice, when it finally came, was hollow. "You've turned your back on this family." "No," Elara said softly. "This family turned its back on potential that didn't fit its mold. I just chose not to wait for permission to matter." She placed the final contract in front of him. "Sign it. Or don't. Either way, Polaris proceeds. But if you walk away now, Your company faces regulatory penalties, market destabilization, and public collapse. He signed. By the time they left the room, stunned and silent, Elara was already on a call with Polaris's board. Yes, she said. Phase 1 is complete. She stood by the towering window, watching the city below. Her reflection in the glass no longer looked like someone trying to be accepted. She looked like someone who had already won. Not because she had taken power, but because she had created it. The headlines broke less than 24 hours later. Northgate Atlas assumes operational control of Hargrave Technologies in surprise acquisition. The quiet power behind Polaris, who is Emer Grayson. Hargrave legacy restructured by mysterious consultant turned corporate titan. The media couldn't get enough of it. Elara watched it all unfold from the glass-walled office of her Manhattan penthouse. She wore no makeup, her hair tied in a low knot, a cashmere shawl thrown casually over a crisp white shirt. Her assistant Serena sat nearby, fielding interview requests and urgent scheduling calls. "They're calling it a hostile takeover," Serena said, scrolling through notifications. "Some outlets are painting you as a silent assassin." Elara arched an eyebrow. "Better than a forgotten shadow. Do you want to respond?" "No," she said simply. "We don't explain. We execute." That had always been her way. Let them speculate. Let them scramble to adjust their narratives. Elara had spent 10 years being ignored, laughed at, brushed off. Now, the same people who once asked if she was still doing that little consulting thing were writing op-eds about her disruptive brilliance. It was almost amusing. Almost. At Hargrave Technologies, the fallout was immediate. Dahlia's exit was abrupt, her final meeting with Polaris's transition team documented only in a terse, typed memo: "Effective immediately, all executive authority is revoked pending restructuring." She had walked out without a word to the press, her designer heels echoing down the marble corridors as if she were still in control. But she wasn't. Julian Hargrave's retirement was made public 3 days later, framed as a graceful step back, though internally, it was anything but. His pride was shattered. Elara's final conversation with him had been brief. "You've won," he'd said bitterly. "I built," she corrected. "You just never looked close enough to see it happening." The boardrooms she once dreamed of sitting in were now hers to command. And she didn't waste time. Under Elara's direction, Northgate moved with surgical precision. The bloated leadership layers at Hargrave were trimmed. Nepotism was replaced with merit. Internal audits uncovered departments siphoning resources into vanity projects. Those were shut down within a week. In their place, she appointed a new generation of leaders, innovators who had been ignored, junior analysts with breakthrough ideas, overlooked managers who now had room to breathe. The energy inside Hargrave shifted almost overnight. What had once been a fortress of ego was slowly becoming a hive of progress. But not everyone was happy. One evening, as Elara walked through the executive floor to check on the redesign of the innovation lab, she saw an all-too-familiar figure waiting by the elevators. Dahlia. Her cousin's once impeccable look was slightly frayed, lipstick faded, eyes tired, posture still proud but cracked at the edges. "You planned this for years," she said, her voice low and sharp. "Did you ever think of telling me?" "I did," Elara replied. "But every time you saw me, you didn't see someone worth hearing." Dahlia looked away. "I was trying to protect our name." "No," Elara said. "You were trying to preserve your position within it." A silence passed between them, one filled with decades of history, of shared childhoods and diverging paths. "Are you enjoying it?" Dahlia asked suddenly. "The power?" Elara didn't answer immediately. She stepped closer, her voice quieter now. "I'm enjoying building something real. Something lasting. Not just for me, but for the people you all ignored." Dahlia's eyes hardened. "You think you're better than us now?" "No," Elara replied. "I was always better. You just never looked long enough to see it." By the end of the quarter, Hargrave Technologies had gone from a stumbling legacy firm to the face of a new kind of corporate leadership. Northgate's model of ethical restructuring, focused on results over reputation, was being studied in business schools and whispered about in elite circles. Venture firms that once overlooked Elara now vied for meetings. Government entities requested her counsel. Her methods were different, quiet, analytical, almost invisible in their elegance. But effective. Very effective. And as the firm's influence spread, so did curiosity about its founder. That's when the messages started coming in. One day, as she reviewed a multi-country logistics blueprint for an upcoming acquisition, Serena entered the room with a handwritten envelope. "No return address," she said, placing it gently on the table. Elara opened it carefully. Inside was a letter. "Elara. I watched that press conference. I recognized you immediately. I'm sorry I never saw it before. Your mother would be proud. Dad." The last two words caught in her throat. Her father, quiet, reserved, never one to challenge the Hargrave machine, had never defended her in public. Not when they ridiculed her at family events. Not when she walked away from Calder and Mason. Not when she vanished into anonymity. But he had been watching. And now, he saw her. Weeks passed. Northgate continued rising. Elara, however, didn't crave the spotlight. She declined awards. Delegated press. She let her work speak instead, through the companies she revitalized, the nonprofits she quietly funded, the scholarships she established in her mother's name. Still, the shift within the family was unavoidable. The next Hargrave gathering wasn't a grand gala. It was a garden brunch in a modest estate outside the city. Fewer pearls. Less performance. There were hand-prepared dishes instead of catered excess. Conversations leaned more honest, less rehearsed. And when Aunt Lenore asked about Elara's company this time, it was with genuine interest, not thinly veiled judgment. "Northgate, right?" she said, slicing into her quiche. "I hear your restructuring strategy is becoming quite the case study." Elara smiled. "So they say. You always were. Determined," Lenore mused. "I just didn't realize how determined. Few did." Later that afternoon, her father pulled her aside, standing quietly by the rose bushes. "I should have spoken up sooner," he said. "You were always brilliant. I was just afraid they wouldn't see it." "They didn't," Elara said. "But I did." He smiled and squeezed her shoulder. "I'm proud of what you've built. Not just the company. The way you carried yourself. And somehow, in all the boardroom battles and billion-dollar deals, that quiet sentence meant the most." Elara now kept two offices, one in Manhattan, and one in a quiet lakeside cabin upstate. The cabin became her thinking space. No Wi-Fi. No noise. Just notebooks, maps, and the echo of possibility. In her main office, behind a framed cityscape, she kept a small photo. It was from that fateful boardroom reveal, the moment she had stepped into the room and Dahlia's face went pale. Not because Elara cherished the shock. But because it reminded her, sometimes, the world doesn't need to see you rising. It only needs to see the results. The echoes of change moved through the Hargrave family like wind through an old estate, stirring dust, toppling portraits, unsettling everything that once felt permanent. It started small. An internal audit revealed that several longtime executives, many of whom had been hired through personal connections, were unable to justify their salaries, or their roles. One by one, they quietly resigned, replaced by leaner teams that delivered more and expected less ceremony. Departments that had once competed for the attention of the Hargrave name now worked with purpose. Fear was no longer the fuel, vision was. And for the first time in decades, Hargrave Technologies was profitable again, not through expansion, but through transformation. The stock price climbed. The investors cheered. And the family watched, some with awe, others with envy. Dahlia, however, wasn't watching. She was trying to regroup. Stripped of her title, reputation tattered, she took a consulting position at a mid-tier analytics firm in Chicago. The pay was decent, the office modern. But no one stood when she walked in. There were no gala invitations, no whispering assistants at her side. For the first time, Dahlia had to prove her value without her last name doing the heavy lifting. And it was harder than she expected. She had spent her life in boardrooms, yes, but most of them were rooms she entered through family privilege. Now, she sat in meetings with data analysts half her age who didn't hesitate to challenge her ideas, and didn't flinch at her tone. Her first pitch flopped. Her second was marginally better. It wasn't failure that hurt. It was irrelevance. One afternoon, months into her new role, Delia received a message. Subject: Strategy Summit Panel, request to join. From Northgate Atlas. At first, she thought it was a mistake. But when she opened the invitation, she saw her name listed among 5 panelists, none of them relatives, all of them women who had experienced public falls from corporate grace. Elara's name wasn't anywhere on the message. But Delia knew. She spent 2 days debating whether to respond. And on the third, she declined. Not out of pride. But because she wasn't ready to be seen yet, not like this. Elsewhere, the Hargrave legacy continued to crumble in places no one could patch. Uncle Julian, once feared, once worshipped, was now a relic of failed power. He made several attempts to re-enter the business world, pitching his legacy consulting services to minor tech firms. But his name had become a cautionary tale. Worse, he didn't understand why. "I built this family's empire," he complained once at a garden brunch. "And now my own daughter runs it into someone else's hands?" Elara didn't respond. She just poured her tea and let the silence stretch. Not all the fallout was bitter. Elara received a letter from her cousin Nolan, a quiet, awkward relative who had once been laughed out of family dinners for pursuing environmental engineering instead of investment banking. "Elara, I watched what you did with Hargrave. I just wanted to say thank you for showing the rest of us we're allowed to define success differently. I'm launching my own green tech firm soon. Not big. Not flashy. But mine. Hope you're well. N." She smiled at the message, then quietly forwarded it to her foundation director. A week later, Nolan received an anonymous grant to help fund his prototype. In the public sphere, Elara was gaining traction she never asked for. Her name began appearing on private invitation lists, summits for female CEOs, closed-door economic panels, mentorship forums for emerging founders. She rarely spoke at them. But when she did, it was with the precision and quiet fire of someone who had learned the hard way not to waste words. At one such forum, an audience member raised their hand during the Q&A. How did it feel, they asked, to beat them? Elara paused. "I didn't beat anyone," she said slowly. "I built something while they weren't looking. That's not victory. That's clarity." There was a long silence, then quiet applause. But clarity didn't mean closure. One rainy Sunday, Elara received a call from her Aunt Lenore, unexpected, unannounced. "I won't take much of your time," the older woman said briskly. "But I wanted to say. I was wrong. About you. About what you were building. We all were." Elara didn't respond right away. "I judged you by what I could see," Lenore admitted. "And you built something invisible. Something powerful. I suppose we never stood a chance." Elara finally spoke. "It was never about beating you. It was about not needing you." A long silence stretched across the line. Then, "Well," Lenore said, her voice tight. "You have it now, don't you?" "I do." Later that evening, Elara stood on the balcony of her cabin, wrapped in a thick knit shawl, watching the lake stretch out beneath a misty sky. She thought about the people she'd grown up with, the voices that had defined her childhood. She didn't hate them. But she no longer needed their permission. She had redefined her place in the world. And they had to watch her do it. Weeks later, Northgate Atlas hit another milestone, their 100th acquisition. Elara's team celebrated with quiet toasts in their private boardroom. No speeches, no press. Just excellence, refined and deliberate. After the celebration, Serena entered her office with a letter in hand. "It's from Chicago," she said, placing it on Elara's desk. It was from Delia. "Elara. I wasn't ready to sit beside you yet. Maybe I never will be. But I do see you now. And I see that I never did. I don't know if you built all this to prove something to us, or to yourself. But either way, it's undeniable. I hope you find peace in it. I'm still learning how to." D. Elara folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer, not for revenge, not for pride. But because the end of one story sometimes deserves its own quiet epilogue. Winter came early that year, dusting the city skyline in frost and turning the trees outside Elara's lakeside retreat into silver silhouettes. The water had stilled, mirroring the quiet calm she now carried, something hard won and earned in silence. For the first time in over a decade, she wasn't planning the next move in secrecy. No webs of shell companies, no hidden corporate maneuvers, no veiled boardroom games. Just space. Just breath. And a life that was finally hers. Northgate Atlas continued to grow, but now with a new philosophy. Elara had spent years proving herself in shadows, outmaneuvering legacy and ego. But she realized that power held in secret could only go so far. So she began stepping forward, not into the spotlight, but into the light. Quiet interviews. Carefully curated panels. Keynotes at emerging founder summits. Her message was simple: success wasn't a mold. And if the world didn't recognize your brilliance, that didn't make it less brilliant. At one such summit, Elara stood in front of a room filled with young women from underserved backgrounds. Some were first-generation college students, others former assistants turned side hustlers trying to build empires. You don't need anyone's permission to be powerful, she told them. And you don't need their validation to be valuable. What you build speaks louder than their expectations. They listened. Not because of her name, many didn't even know it. They listened because she had done what so many were still afraid to try. Build quietly. Build smart. Build in spite of them. Back in New York, the corporate world continued to whisper her name. Hargrave Technologies, now lean and innovative, had earned back its reputation, and then some. Under Elara's restructuring, it had become a model of ethical corporate transformation. No more nepotism. No more ceremonial titles. Just performance and purpose. She remained chairwoman, but rarely interfered. Instead, she appointed leadership based on data, vision, and alignment. Among those leaders was Nolan, her cousin, who now headed the sustainability and green tech division. His passion and designs had turned into patent-pending innovations in battery storage and carbon recycling. He never forgot that anonymous grant. But he never brought it up either. They both understood. Elara also created the Grayson Fund, an initiative to support women and minority entrepreneurs navigating male-dominated industries. It provided capital, mentorship, and, most importantly, protection from the kinds of sharks Elara had once fought off alone. The fund was fiercely private. No grand events, no red carpet launches. Its first 17 recipients had no idea the founder had once been the failure of her own powerful family. They only knew that someone believed in their vision. Someone who had walked through the fire and emerged without asking for applause. One morning, nearly a year after the Hargrave restructuring had gone public, Elara received an unexpected visitor. Her father. He arrived without warning, carrying a thermos of coffee and a quiet look on his face. "I thought maybe," he said, "we could talk. Not about business. Just life." They sat on the cabin porch, wrapped in layers, sipping coffee and watching the water move like memory. "I watched you," he said after a long pause. "All those years. I saw how they treated you. And I said nothing." Elara didn't interrupt. She let the words come. "I didn't know how to help," he continued. "And I was afraid that if I did, they'd turn on me too. So I stayed silent." "Silence is a choice," Elara said softly. "But so is change." He nodded, his eyes glinting with unshed tears. "You changed everything." "I built what they never thought I could," she replied. "And I did it without becoming like them." "I'm proud of you," he said, voice trembling. "Not just for what you built, but for how you stayed. You." For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the weight of that moment. Not validation, but resolution. Later that night, Elara pulled out an old file from her drawer, a weathered, leather-bound folder labeled Origin. Inside were the very first notes she had scribbled in her apartment at 28, the night she walked away from Calder and Mason. Her manifesto of sorts. A few dozen bullet points, half legible, some even laughable in hindsight. But one line stood out, bolded and circled. "Build something they can't ignore, even if they never know it was you." She smiled. They had ignored her. Then they had underestimated her. And now? They didn't just know it was her, they knew she had rewritten the rules entirely. The next Hargrave family gathering was different. No chandeliers, no orchestras. Just a quiet dinner in a countryside estate, hosted by Nolan. Long wooden tables, candles, shared dishes. The air was filled with laughter, not competition. Aunt Lenore helped serve dessert. Uncle Julian remained silent most of the evening, occasionally glancing at Elara with something that might have once been disdain, but now seemed closer to reluctant respect. Delia was there, seated 2 spots down. She didn't wear couture. She didn't speak with authority. But she smiled when Elara raised her glass in a simple toast to growth, in all its forms. And this time, Delia raised her glass too. They would never be close. But they were no longer enemies. In her Manhattan office, behind the glass wall overlooking the skyline, Elara kept only a few personal items. One of them was a framed photo, not from a celebration, but from the moment she had first walked into the Polaris boardroom, poised and unrecognizable. The shock on her cousin's face. The disbelief in the eyes of her uncle. The power in her own posture. It wasn't vengeance she saw in that photo. It was transformation. Years passed. Northgate expanded to 63 countries. The Grayson Fund backed over 300 entrepreneurs. Elara was listed among the most influential strategists of her generation, not because she chased fame, but because she redefined what quiet power looked like. And still, she never forgot where she started. The overlooked one. The joke at the table. The woman they underestimated. She never forgot what it felt like to have a room full of people doubt her simply because she didn't fit their blueprint. And she never stopped building new ones for the next generation. Because legacy, to her, wasn't about inheritance. It was about impact. And power? Power was never about noise. It was about the ability to move the world, and never need to shout that you did.